I thought I'd found my fairy tale ending with a billionaire who promised me the world. But 3 days before our wedding, I discovered the devastating truth about what he'd been doing with my own sister behind my back. What I found changed everything I believed about love and family. Let me start by telling you who I am. My name is Jasmine, and at 32, I had built what most people would call a successful life. I was the senior marketing executive at one of Atlanta's top advertising firms, owned my own condo in Buckhead, and had worked my way up from nothing after losing my parents when I was just 19. I thought I had everything figured out, you know. I was independent, financially stable, and honestly, I wasn't even looking for love when it found me. It was a crisp October evening at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala. I was there representing my company, networking in that little black dress I'd saved up for months to buy. The ballroom was filled with Atlanta's elite, doctors, lawyers, business owners, all writing checks with more zeros than I made in a year. I was sipping champagne, making small talk, when this man approached me. Tall, confident, with these warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through you. He introduced himself as David Wellington, and when he smiled, I swear the whole room seemed to fade away. "You look like someone who actually cares about being here, not just someone who came to be seen," he said, and I was hooked. We talked for hours about everything: his passion for helping underprivileged kids, my work in marketing, our shared love of old jazz music. He was charming without being slimy, successful without being arrogant. When he told me he owned several tech companies, I was impressed but not intimidated. He made me feel like I was the most interesting person in that room full of millionaires. By the end of the night, he'd asked for my number, and I gave it to him without hesitation. 3 days later, he took me to dinner at this intimate little restaurant where he knew the chef personally. A week after that, we were spending entire weekends together. David was everything I thought I wanted: generous, attentive, and he seemed genuinely interested in my dreams and ambitions. The way he looked at me made me feel beautiful, valued, like I was finally enough just as I was. Now, I need to tell you about Rachel, my baby sister. She's 4 years younger than me, and she's been my responsibility since our parents died in that car accident when I was 19 and she was 15. While I threw myself into work and building a stable life, Rachel chased her dreams of becoming an actress. I admired her courage, but Hollywood is brutal, especially for a black woman trying to make it without connections or money. Rachel had been struggling in Los Angeles for almost 10 years. She'd had a few small roles, some commercial work, but nothing that paid the bills consistently. I'd been sending her money every month since she graduated high school: rent money, grocery money, headshot money, whatever she needed. Don't get me wrong, I loved my sister and wanted to support her dreams, but sometimes I wondered if I was enabling her to avoid facing reality. When Rachel moved back to Atlanta after another failed pilot season, I could see the jealousy in her eyes whenever she looked at my life: my stable job, my nice apartment, my car that wasn't held together with duct tape and prayers. She never said anything directly, but there were little comments. "Must be nice to have everything handed to you," or "Some of us can't all be corporate sellouts." It stung because I'd worked so hard for everything I had, and I'd been supporting her dreams the whole time. Despite the tension, we were still close. Rachel was the only family I had left, and I loved her fiercely. She was talented, beautiful, and when she wasn't comparing our lives, she was the same funny, caring little sister who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms. I believed in her dreams even when she didn't, and I thought that despite her struggles, she was genuinely happy to see me building a good life. After everything we'd been through together, I trusted her completely. 8 months after David and I met, he proposed, and honey, let me tell you, it was like something out of a movie. He flew us to Savannah for the weekend, said he wanted to show me where his grandmother used to live. We were walking through Forsyth Park at sunset when he got down on one knee right there by the fountain. The ring was gorgeous, a 3-carat solitaire that caught the light like captured fire. I said yes before he even finished asking the question. Rachel's reaction when I called to tell her was everything I hoped for. She screamed with excitement, cried happy tears, and immediately started planning to fly back to Atlanta to help with wedding preparations. "My big sister is marrying a billionaire," she kept saying, and for the first time in years, I saw pure joy in her voice instead of that underlying bitterness. It felt like we were finally going to be okay, like both our lives were falling into place. David insisted on paying for everything, and I mean everything. The venue at the Atlanta Botanical Garden, the designer dress, the flowers, the catering. He said money was no object, and he wanted to give me the wedding of my dreams. I felt like Cinderella. Here was this man who loved me enough to spare no expense, who wanted to celebrate our love in the most beautiful way possible. When I tried to contribute or suggested more modest options, he'd just smile and say, "Baby, let me spoil you. You deserve the world." Rachel threw herself into helping with the wedding planning. She had great taste and creative ideas, and David seemed to appreciate her input. He'd often say, "Family is everything to me, and Rachel is your family, which makes her my family too." It warmed my heart to see them getting along so well. Rachel would spend hours at David's office, helping coordinate with vendors, picking out flowers, tasting cakes. I was grateful to have her help because my job was demanding, and wedding planning was overwhelming. Having my sister there to handle the details felt like a blessing. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I ignored, all the red flags I explained away because I was so happy to finally have everything I thought I wanted. It started small. David's phone was always face down when we were together, and he'd step away to take certain calls. When I asked about it, he'd say it was just business, boring tech stuff that would put me to sleep. I believed him because successful men have demanding careers, right? Then I started noticing changes in Rachel. Suddenly, she had new clothes, not thrift store finds or knockoffs, but real designer pieces. When I complimented a beautiful purse she was carrying, she brushed it off, saying she'd gotten it at a consignment shop. Her apartment, which had been furnished with hand-me-downs and yard sale finds, started looking different too. New furniture, expensive artwork, a laptop that cost more than she usually made in 3 months. When I asked how she was affording everything, she said she'd booked a commercial that paid really well. David began insisting that Rachel help with more and more wedding business. At first it made sense. She had time, and I was busy with work. But then it became excessive. He'd call her directly instead of going through me, schedule meetings with vendors that I couldn't attend, and always have some reason why Rachel needed to be there instead of me. "Rachel has such good taste," he'd say, "and she understands your style better than anyone." It felt like I was being pushed out of planning my own wedding. The worst part was the feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. You know that feeling, that little voice in the back of your mind that whispers warnings you don't want to hear. I kept pushing it down, telling myself I was just stressed about the wedding, nervous about such a big life change. I'd worked so hard to build a good life, and I'd found a man who seemed perfect for me. I didn't want to sabotage my own happiness with paranoid thoughts. But late at night, when David thought I was sleeping, I'd catch him texting someone, his face lit up by his phone screen, smiling in a way that made my stomach turn. When I asked who he was talking to so late, he'd say it was his business partner in California, dealing with time zone differences. I wanted to believe him so badly that I forced myself to accept every explanation, every excuse, every reason why things that felt wrong were actually perfectly normal. 3 days before my wedding, I was supposed to have my final dress fitting at the boutique in Midtown. I'd been dreaming about this moment for months, seeing myself in that perfect dress one last time before walking down the aisle. The fitting went beautifully, and I was floating on air as I left the shop. But halfway home, I realized I'd left my purse sitting on the chair in the dressing room. It had my credit cards, my ID, everything I needed for the weekend's final preparations, I turned around and drove back, expecting the boutique to be closed, but the owner was still there finishing up some alterations. She let me in through the back entrance, and I grabbed my purse quickly, thanking her for staying late. As I walked back to my car, I noticed a familiar silver Mercedes parked across the street. My heart stopped. It was David's car, the one with the custom license plate that read DWTECH1. But what was he doing in this part of town? He'd told me he was having dinner with his investors tonight, going over last-minute details for some big merger. I sat in my car for a moment, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he was picking up something for the wedding. A surprise gift, but as I looked around, there was nothing nearby that would explain his presence. Just a few apartment buildings, a coffee shop that had been closed for hours, and a small florist that specialized in funeral arrangements. Then I saw him emerge from the building directly across from where his car was parked. He looked around cautiously, like he was making sure no one was watching, before getting into his car and driving away. My hands were shaking as I followed at a distance. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that there had to be an innocent explanation. But that sick feeling in my stomach was growing stronger with every turn he made. He wasn't heading toward the restaurant where he said he'd be having dinner. Instead, he was driving toward Rachel's neighborhood, and suddenly, everything I'd been trying to ignore came rushing back. The secretive phone calls, Rachel's new expensive things, the way they seemed to have their own private conversations about wedding details. I parked at the end of Rachel's street and watched as David pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex. My sister lived in a modest place in Virginia Highland, the kind of building where struggling artists and recent college graduates rented small one-bedrooms they could barely afford. I'd been helping her with rent for years, so I knew that building like the back of my hand. There was no reason for David to be there, unless he was seeing Rachel, and there was no reason for him to be seeing Rachel without me knowing about it. 20 minutes later, they both came out together. Rachel was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, a beautiful burgundy number that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Her hair was done professionally, and she was carrying that expensive purse I'd complimented weeks earlier. David had his hand on the small of her back as they walked to his car, the same way he touched me when we went out together. The intimate familiarity of their body language made my blood run cold. I followed them to Harrison's, an upscale restaurant in Buckhead where David had taken me on our 6-month anniversary. It was the kind of place where they knew him by name, where he had a regular table, where the wine list cost more than most people's car payments. I watched from my car in the parking garage as they walked in together, David's arm around Rachel's waist, both of them laughing about something I couldn't hear. The way he looked at her, it was the same way he'd looked at me that first night at the charity gala. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. Part of me wanted to march right in there and confront them both, but something held me back. Maybe it was the need to know the full truth before I acted, or maybe it was the desperate hope that there was still some innocent explanation for what I was seeing. So I waited in that parking garage, my hands gripped around the steering wheel, watching the entrance and trying to figure out how long my fiancé and my sister had been betraying me. After what felt like hours but was probably only 45 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I walked into the restaurant, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. The hostess recognized me from previous dinners with David and smiled warmly, but I brushed past her toward the dining room. I spotted them immediately. They were seated at David's usual table in the back corner, the one with the perfect view of the city lights that he'd once told me was romantic. What I saw made my knees almost give out. David was holding Rachel's hand across the table, his thumb stroking her palm in that gentle way he did with me when he was being affectionate. Rachel was leaning toward him, her face glowing with happiness, looking more beautiful and confident than I'd seen her in years. They were completely absorbed in each other, whispering and laughing like lovers who couldn't get enough of each other's company. I ducked behind a pillar where I could hear them but remain unseen. My phone was in my hand, and without really thinking about it, I started recording. I needed proof of what I was witnessing, because part of me still couldn't believe it was real. David was speaking in that low, intimate voice he used when he told me he loved me. "After Saturday, everything changes," he was saying. "Once I'm married, we'll have to be more careful, but the business merger will be complete, and then we can start planning our real future together." Rachel's response hit me like a physical blow. "I can't wait to stop pretending to be happy for her," she said, her voice bitter in a way I'd never heard before. "Do you know how hard it's been, watching her plan this whole wedding, acting like the supportive sister, when all I want is for Saturday to be over, so we can stop hiding?" David reached across the table and touched her face tenderly. "I know, baby, but you know why we had to do it this way. The marriage is just business. Her connections, her reputation, the way she fits into the corporate world. It's what I need for the Henderson merger. But you're who I want to wake up next to every morning." I stood there behind that pillar, recording their conversation, as my entire world crumbled around me. Everything I'd believed about my relationship, about my sister, about the man I was supposed to marry in 3 days. It was all a lie. David had never loved me. I was just a business transaction, a way to secure some corporate deal. And Rachel, my baby sister, who I'd supported and loved and protected since we were teenagers, had been sleeping with my fiancé and planning to continue the affair after my wedding. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I felt like I might collapse right there on the restaurant floor. I stumbled out of that restaurant like a woman possessed, my vision blurry with tears I was desperately trying to hold back. I made it to my car before the dam burst completely. I sat there in the parking garage, sobbing so hard my whole body shook, playing back every moment of the past 8 months and seeing it all differently now. Every time David had been secretive with his phone, every expensive item Rachel had acquired, every meeting they'd had without me, it all made horrible, perfect sense now. The cruelest part was realizing how long they'd been laughing at me behind my back. David's proposal, the elaborate wedding planning, all his sweet words about loving me and wanting to build a life together, it was all performance. I was the mark in their con game, the naive woman who believed in fairy tales and happy endings. And Rachel, my own sister, had watched me glow with happiness about my engagement, had helped me pick out flowers and taste cakes, had listened to me gush about how lucky I felt, all while she was sleeping with the man I thought was my soulmate. I thought about all the money I'd spent on bridesmaid dresses and shoes for Rachel, the way I'd included her in every decision because I wanted her to feel important and loved. I remembered the night she'd stayed up with me addressing wedding invitations, how she'd hugged me and said she was so proud of the woman I'd become. Every memory felt poison now, every sweet moment tainted with the knowledge of what she was really thinking. But as I sat there crying in my car, something shifted inside me. The devastation was still there, the heartbreak was real, but underneath it all, I felt something else growing. Anger. Pure, righteous anger at being used and manipulated by the two people I'd trusted most in the world. They thought I was naive, thought I was weak, thought I'd just go along with their plan without ever figuring it out. They had underestimated me completely, and that was going to be their biggest mistake. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I checked into a hotel downtown and spent the hours until dawn planning my next move. I wasn't going to confront them, not yet. If David and Rachel thought they were so clever, if they believed they'd pulled off the perfect deception, then I was going to let them keep thinking that right up until the moment I destroyed them both. But I needed to be smart about this. I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. I started researching David's business, this merger he'd mentioned. It didn't take long to find information about Henderson Industries, a family-owned corporation known for their conservative values and traditional approach to business. The CEO, Margaret Henderson, was a 70-year-old woman who'd built her company on principles of integrity and family stability. In every interview I found, She talked about only doing business with people who shared her values, people she could trust to represent her brand with dignity and respect. The merger David was pursuing wasn't just about money, it was about legitimacy. Henderson Industries would give his tech companies the credibility and market access he needed to compete with the bigger players. But Margaret Henderson was notoriously careful about her business partners. She investigated their personal lives, their reputations, their standing in the community. A man involved in infidelity and family drama would never meet her standards. David needed to appear stable, trustworthy, committed to family values. That's why he needed a wife like me, successful, respectable, with a good reputation in the community. But here's what David didn't know. I'd actually met Margaret Henderson before, at a conference for women in business. We'd had coffee together and talked about the challenges of building a career in male-dominated industries. She'd given me her card and told me to reach out if I ever wanted to discuss opportunities in her company. She was exactly the kind of woman who would be disgusted by David's deception, and she was going to be at my wedding. David had insisted on inviting several of his business associates, including the entire Henderson family, because he wanted to show off his perfect life, his perfect wife, his perfect image. He was about to get a demonstration of just how imperfect his life really was. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of perfect weather that makes you believe in fairy tales. Clear blue skies, gentle breeze, temperature in the mid-70s. The Atlanta Botanical Garden looked like something out of a dream, with white roses and baby's breath everywhere, string quartet playing softly in the background, and guests arriving in their finest clothes. If you didn't know the truth, you'd think you were witnessing the most romantic wedding of the year. I played my part perfectly. I smiled for the photographs, hugged the guests, accepted their congratulations with grace and apparent joy. Rachel was there in her bridesmaid dress, playing the role of supportive sister beautifully. She kept asking if I was nervous, if there was anything she could do to help, if I was having second thoughts. "It's normal to have cold feet," she said as she helped me with my veil. "But David loves you so much, and you two are perfect together." The audacity of her performance was almost admirable. David looked handsome in his custom tuxedo, greeting guests and accepting their well wishes like the successful businessman he was. I watched him shake hands with Margaret Henderson and her family, saw him introduce them to his parents who'd flown in from Chicago, witnessed him playing the role of devoted groom to perfection. He even pulled me aside at one point and told me how beautiful I looked, how excited he was to start our life together. "After today, it's just you and me, baby," he whispered in my ear. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. The ceremony began right on schedule. The string quartet played Pachelbel's Canon as I walked down the aisle, my arm linked with our family friend who was giving me away since my father couldn't be there. David's face when he saw me was a masterpiece of acting. He looked like a man seeing his dreams come true. The officiant began the traditional words about marriage being a sacred bond between two people who love and honor each other. When we got to the vows, David went first, speaking beautifully about commitment and partnership and building a future together. Then it was my turn. "David," I began, my voice clear and strong, "8 months ago, you asked me to marry you, and I said yes because I believed you loved me." The guests were smiling, expecting a sweet romantic declaration. "But 3 days ago, I discovered the truth about who you really are." The smiles started to fade. "I know about Rachel. I know about the merger. I know that this entire relationship has been a lie, designed to help your business and your reputation." The wedding guests were shifting uncomfortably now, and David's face had gone completely white. "So instead of vows of love and commitment, I have something else to share with everyone here today." I pulled out my phone and played the recording from the restaurant for everyone to hear. David's voice filled the garden, talking about how the marriage was just business, how Rachel was who he really wanted to be with, how they'd been planning to continue their affair after the wedding. You could have heard a pin drop as the entire wedding party listened to my fiancé and my sister discussing their betrayal in their own words. Margaret Henderson stood up first. "Young man," she said in that crisp, authoritative voice that had built a business empire, "if this is how you handle your personal relationships, I can only imagine how you conduct your business affairs. Consider our merger permanently cancelled." She gathered her family and walked out, followed by several other business associates who clearly wanted nothing to do with the scandal they'd just witnessed. David tried to salvage the situation, claiming the recording was fake, that I was having some kind of breakdown. But Rachel's face told the whole story. She was standing there in her bridesmaid dress, tears streaming down her cheeks, unable to deny what everyone had just heard. Some of the guests were angry, some were uncomfortable, some were clearly entertained by the drama. David's parents looked mortified, and I almost felt sorry for them until I remembered they were about to learn what kind of son they'd raised. The legal consequences came swiftly, because David had signed a prenuptial agreement that included a morality clause, something his lawyer had insisted on to protect his assets. His infidelity voided several important provisions. I was entitled to compensation for the emotional distress and the wedding expenses, plus damages for the business opportunities I'd lost while planning a wedding to a man who was using me. My lawyer was very thorough in calculating exactly what David's deception had cost me, both financially and professionally. Rachel faced her own consequences: the apartment she'd been living in, the car she'd been driving, the expensive clothes and jewelry. All of it had been paid for by David, and it all had to be returned. More importantly, our relationship was over. Some betrayals are too deep to forgive, and sleeping with your sister's fiancé while helping plan her wedding definitely qualifies. The last time I saw her, she was moving back to Los Angeles with nothing but the clothes in a single suitcase. That was 2 years ago, and I can honestly say that cancelling my wedding was the best decision I ever made. It took time to heal from the betrayal, to learn to trust my instincts again, to rebuild my sense of self-worth. But going through that experience taught me things about my own strength that I never would have learned otherwise. I discovered that I'm not the naive woman David and Rachel thought I was. I'm smart, I'm resilient, and I refuse to let anyone use me ever again. My career has flourished since then. Without the distraction of wedding planning and a relationship built on lies, I was able to focus completely on my work. I was promoted to Executive Vice President last year, and I'm now being considered for a position as CEO of my own agency. The confidence I gained from standing up for myself in that garden has carried over into every aspect of my life. I negotiate harder, I trust my gut, and I never settle for less than I deserve. I've also found real love, the kind David was only pretending to offer. His name is Marcus, and he's a pediatric surgeon who volunteers at the same children's hospital where I first met David. The difference is night and day. Marcus is transparent about everything, introduces me to his friends and family immediately, and shows his love through consistent actions rather than grand gestures designed to impress. We've been together for 8 months now, and every day I'm grateful that David's betrayal freed me to find something real. As for David and Rachel, I heard through mutual acquaintances that their relationship didn't survive the aftermath of the wedding scandal. Apparently, when the excitement of sneaking around was gone and they had to face the reality of what they'd done, they discovered they didn't actually like each other very much. David's business never recovered from losing the Henderson merger, and Rachel never made it as an actress. Sometimes the universe has its own way of delivering justice, and watching the two people who betrayed me face the consequences of their choices was more satisfying than any revenge I could have planned myself.